Sports romance is having a moment, and I want to talk about why I think that this is fundamentally changing our society. Hi, Janelle here, sexual health expert reader, certified sex educator, and romance book lover. I just got home from the inaugural Sports Romance Con, and oh my goodness, I have so many thoughts about this subgenre of literature that I've just been thinking about all weekend, and I want to talk about here. So as you've heard me say before, and I'm sure I will say countless more times on this channel, romance as a whole is this cultural force, as it's the only place in our society that centers women and other marginalized voices, and it's the sole place that is crafted from our perspective for our perspective. But I gotta be honest, I think that within the genre of romance, sports romance specifically takes this cultural influence and impact to a whole nother level. So let me explain what I mean by that. So we live in this male-centric society, right? And at the center of this male-centric society, sports are held on the highest pedestal. It's viewed as the peak of manhood, which within a patriarchal structure, that translates to the peak of humanity. And I think very few would argue that athletes, male athletes, that they are the gods in our society, and being a part of the fandom is this religion, right? This religion that sits at the core of our culture. And it's this religion in this space that is completely dominated by male fans. Male fans who love to gatekeep and exclude women and anyone else that doesn't look like them from this sacred community. So this, to me, is where sports romance is fundamentally shifting the core of our society. And what sports romance books are doing are tearing down our existing social structures around the cult of sport and completely rewriting the cultural narrative about who belongs and who gets to be a part of this sacred thing. I think it's important to note that I do think this is happening kind of with this perfect storm with the rise of Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark and Simone Biles. And there's other incredible athletes, but these really are the biggest names that have transcended out of their sport. And then of course the impact of Taylor Swift becoming a football fan. Like the cultural shift is palpable. So when I think about how sports romance books are deconstructing this core entity of our society, I think there are layers to this deconstruction, right? And from my extensive research as a sports romance girly, both as a sports fan and as someone who reads a ton of sports romance books, I do think that there are layers to how sports romance stories are breaking down these barriers. So at the surface, what sports romance is doing is creating this entry point to becoming a fan and to introducing people to the sport, right? And to giving people a seat at the table. This is happening in tons of sports romance books. Now, typically in these books, there'll be one of the main characters often is an athlete, often a male main character, and the love interest is often outside of the world of sports. Unless it's an MM book, then they're probably both athletes. And we saw this with books like Pucking Around by Emily Rath and Icebreaker by Hannah Grace that have just absolutely demolished barriers to hockey and created just this new wave of hockey fans. And kind of a side note to that, it's just wild to me that these so-called expert business people who are running the big sports leagues, that they're not investing in sports romance to expand their viewership. Like, that's wild to me. To me, if I was running, that'd be the first thing I do. I'd have a publishing house that's just for publishing sports romance. But I guess their hate for women outweighs their want to grow the game. These authors that I've mentioned, along with countless others, are just breaking down barriers to the world of sports. So the next layer of the power of sports romance, to me, is really in the books where the FMCs are not just fans on the outside, but they actually are holding positions within the organizations. So this could be like a photographer, a social media manager, a flight attendant, someone who runs PR, or maybe they work within the charity organization. In real life, these are often jobs that are traditionally held by women. But what this is doing is it's showing readers like, hey, like women play a key role in these organizations. Like they're not just fans on the outside, they have these critical roles within an organization. So again, these books are just starting to make sports more accessible to everyone and really to expand what readers see as the norm and what is possible. So the peak of sports romance's ability to shift culture is coming from these books that are rewiring our brains and belief systems and rewriting cultural narratives in terms of the roles that women can play within the world of sports. So these are the books with FMCs who are holding the highest level positions possible within sports, whether that be FMCs as owners or commissioners or athletic trainers or physicians, physical therapists, coaches, these other executive positions. These books are completely changing what we believe is possible for women within sports. This level also will have athletes as the FMCs. But one thing that I do think is really interesting and that I think is still lacking within the sports romance space is that I haven't really seen a book yet that shows a female athlete who is the level of Serena Williams fame, right? Like Serena Williams is that God level, is a God level athlete. So in my opinion, when it comes to this top tier of deconstructing sports as we know it, as society as we understand it, no one is doing it quite like Chelsea Curto. So her books are phenomenal. And in her book, Face Off, the FMC is the first woman in the NHL and the MMC is her teammate. And she's definitely teeing up a Jessica Campbell-esque story where the FMC is a head coach in the NHL. Now, I'm not saying that to reach this level that the FMC needs to infiltrate men's sports, but I would be so incredible to see more FMCs who are like that God level of Simone Biles and Serena Williams. So in thinking about these different layers, what these stories are doing is altering what we see as possible and what we see as valid. Like, yes, of course, it's a story, it's make-believe, it's fantasy, but these stories give us hope and it instills this belief in us and it starts us asking like, hey, why not? Why not? Like, why couldn't a woman do this? Why couldn't I do this? Why couldn't I dream to this level? And this asking of why not is the start of a cultural revolution. So another thing I think is really important to talk about in this conversation of how sports romance is shifting culture. It's not only about how sports romance is shifting how women see themselves within the world of sports, it's also fundamentally changing what readers believe masculinity should look like. And I know that this is a conversation that we have about sports in general, but there's something incredibly profound about having MMCs who are athletes, who represent, the gods in our society, who represent the peak of the hierarchy, and having them show positive masculinity, right? We have been so conditioned to believe that tough and strong athletes, that they're the peak of manhood and they don't show emotions and they hustle and they push and they keep going until near burnout. But that's so different than the MMCs in sports romance, right? The MMCs in sports romance completely flip this narrative on its head. And it shows us that, hey, you can be a great athlete and you can be soft and loving with high emotional intelligence and you can be an equal partner and carry the mental load and all of these different things. We definitely can have a conversation about the role that sports romance is playing in terms of shifting how we see masculinity without mentioning Lyssa Kay Adams' Bromance Book Club, one of my all-time favorite series. I fully believe that Lyssa has changed readers' brain chemistry and fundamentally altered and raised the bar for men, specifically these men who hold these high levels in our society, right? Whether it's an athlete or a business person or an entertainer, whatever it is, the bar has been raised. And when we can encounter these men in sports romance, it just changes us. So as you can see, I am obsessed with the role that sports romance is playing in our society. And I truly believe that sports romance is creating immeasurably profound impacts in our culture. And it's shifting the core of society, right? Because at the core of society is sports. It's just breaking down barriers and completely changing the demographic and just opening it and saying, hey, you belong here. And I think that sports romance is just fundamentally changing what we believe is possible. It's changing what we dream of, what we believe and what we know we can do. And it's getting us to ask that question of why not? Why not me? And for that, I will never stop reading and recommending sports romance. So let me know what you think. How do you see sports romance fundamentally changing culture? And if you have some good recs, drop them in the comments and definitely share this video, click subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.